This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick. Chapter 20, Winds Rising. And our symbol is the wave symbol. We call it that? The sea symbol?
This symbol to me always seemed a little out of place. It just seems a little simplistic to me. Almost like puzzle pieces. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a little MC Escher with the way the waves interact, but I always found it to be a little I don't know,
Odd.
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of the other symbols are have more complexity than this one. Yeah, so there's a white border around it, but then like on the top, the white border fades into the waves, and so it looks like it doesn't have the border on top, and it's very odd to me. This is one of my least favorite symbols of all the chapter headers. I like this one not at all.
No, it's probably one of the most simple ones. Chapter 20, Winds Rising. Elaine struggled to open the latch on an arm of her chair and darted after them, almost colliding with Nynaeve at the ladder. The ship still rocked, if not as violently as before. Uncertain whether they were sinking, she pushed Nynaeve ahead of her, prodding her to climb faster. On the deck, the crew dashed about, checking the rigging or peering over the side to inspect the hull, shouting about earthquakes. The same shouts were rising from the dockmen, too, but Elaine knew better. Despite the tumbled things on the piers and the ships yet pitching at their moorings, she stared at the stone. The huge fortress was still, except for the masses of startled birds swirling about and that pale banner waving, almost lazily, in an isolated breeze. No sign that anything had ever touched the mountain mass. That had been Rand, though. She was sure of it. She turned to find Nynaeve looking at her, and for a long moment their eyes met. "A fine pickling, if he's damaged the ship," Elaine said finally. "How are we supposed to get to Tanchico if he goes tossing all the ships about? Light. He has to be all right. I can do nothing if he isn't. He is all right. He is." Nynaeve touched her arm reassuringly. "No doubt that second letter of yours touched a nerve. Men always overreact when they let their emotions go. It's the price for holding them in the way they do. He may be the Dragon Reborn, but he must learn, man to woman, that... What are they doing here?" They were the two men standing amid the bustling sea folk on the deck. One was Tom Merrilin, in his gleeman's cloak, with leather-cased harp and flute on his back, and a bundle lying at his feet beside a battered wooden box with a lock. The other was a lean, handsome Terran in his middle years, a hard, dark man, wearing a flat, conical straw hat, and one of those commoner's coats that fit snugly to the waist, then flared like a short skirt. A notched swordbreaker hung at a belt, worn over his coat, and he leaned on a pale staff of knobbly, jointed wood, exactly his own height, and no thicker than his thumb. A square-tied parcel dangled from a loop on his shoulder. Elaine knew him. His name was Julian Sandar. It was obvious the two men were strangers. Despite standing almost side by side, they held themselves with stiff reticence. Their attentions were directed the same way, though, split between following the sailmistress's progress toward the stern deck and peering at Elaine and Nynaeve, plainly uncertain, and masking it behind a brisk show of confidence. Nynaeve grinned and stroked his long white mustaches. Oh, wow, I just read that totally wrong.
Nynaeve grinned and smoked.
Just leave that in. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, that was good.
Tom grinned and stroked his long white mustaches and nodded every time he looked up at the two of them. Sandar made solemn, self-assured bows. "He is not damaged," Coeen said, climbing the ladder. "I can sail within the hour, if it pleases you." He, meaning the ship, I feel like I should clarify. So, I don't know if there's anything you really want to say about this. There's a lot of explanation coming into the chapter. A lot of it is the conversation between the four of them. Coeen as well, so the five.
I guess the only thing I want to say about that is the second letter, is the assumption that no doubt that second letter of yours touched a nerve. He's totally wrong about that. It has nothing to do with the letters. It's him driving the sword into the stone.
Of course, if anything important has happened, it would have to do with us, wouldn't it?
Of course. Well, we are the center of the universe, aren't we?
Right. Yes, of course we are.
Of course.
No, it's Rand slamming Kalendor into the floor during his demonstration, or he summons like all the people of the stone that he can to go into this big room, and he's like, the stone held the sword that cannot be touched before I got here, and it will hold it until I come back. And he slams it in to the ground, sword in the stone, hint hint. Before he leaves, the stone rings like a bell, and this and that. We saw as Perrin's leaving, he hears it as well.
And he's trying to get like pulled back in by the Taviran pulling, and so he like runs out of the city really fast in order to escape it. So that's going on at this exact time. So
as Tom gets on the ship to sail to Tanchico, Perrin is riding out of the city, connected by this sound, which RJ does quite a bit.
He likes to sync up events. He likes to say, okay, in this scene, this one event is occurring at the same time, and everyone's seeing it, and then that tells you like how far forward and back in time you're jumping between chapters. And right now, that gonging is what's centering us in time.
And in the first ever Bubble of Evil chapter, in the stone, it's a cock crowed.
That's right.
And that line
Between
happens.
the three visions.
Yeah.
And then if we want to get really far into it, after Winter's Heart, the cleansing.
Yes, which I feel like that's a much even bigger effect, because channelers for like hundreds and hundreds of miles feel it. So most of the main characters know that happened, or all the channelers anyway.
And he spends like more than half a book going back into what happened at the end of the last book, and it pissed everybody off. Because we wanted to go forward in time, because we'd waited years to find out what was going to happen after the cleansing, and instead we went back in time. It was frustrating at the time. Now, I love it. Then, I hated it.
We see shortly after this that Coeen and Sandar are acquainted already. Apparently, Coeen has hired Sandar several times to track down people who have stolen from their hold, I guess, or stolen their stuff.
That seems like an odd coincidence to me, to be honest. But I guess it just proves him to be like an honorable man who doesn't have any prejudice against outsiders.
Yeah, she's like, I don't know anything about this old Gleeman, but the thief catcher is a good man, even considering that he is shorebound. No offense to you, under the light. The Gleeman I do not know, yet a Gleeman can enliven a voyage and lighten tired hours. Nynaeve says, you know, Master Sandar? Twice he has found those who pilfered from us, and found them quickly. Another shoreman would have taken longer, so he might ask more for the work.
I mean, Sandar is definitely, he's well trusted, he has a great reputation. His real issue is, and that makes his betrayal because of the Black Aja compulsion that much worse, because it's not something that he would do on his own.
I feel like the girls try to lay blame on his feet a little more here, but even as they're walking away later from this conversation and they're just talking amongst the two of them, Elaine and Nynaeve, even Nynaeve says, like, you know, in reality, he didn't have a choice.
No, it was compulsion. He was under a spell from Leandrin, and like, there's nothing he could have done about it. There's no way he could have avoided doing what she asked.
Yeah, it's really not fair to blame him.
No, not at all. Not that, you know, human nature doesn't mean that they don't blame him, because he did do it. But, you know, he makes a point of saying, like, but if you'll forgive me, the last time I served you was in the company of Matt Cawthon, when we pulled you both out of the water before the silver pike could get you. I love that, because she's saying, you didn't serve us very well. And he's like, actually, the last time was not when I betrayed you. The last time I pulled your ass out of there.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, we wouldn't have been in there without you. And he's like, well, that's not really my fault now, is it?
That is all very well, Elaine said briskly, but you still haven't said why you want to go to Chanchico. He drew a deep breath and eyed Nynaeve warily. Elaine was not sure she liked him being more careful of the other woman than of her. I was rousted out of my house no more than half an hour gone, he said carefully, by a man you know, I think. A tall, stone-faced man calling himself Lan. Nynaeve's eyebrows rose slightly. He came on behalf of another man you know. A shepherd, I was told. I was given a great quantity of gold and told to accompany you, both of you. I was told that if you do not return safely from this journey, shall we say it would be better to drown myself than come back. Lan was emphatic, and the shepherd no less, in his message. I liked that. Shall I say, if you don't come back, I'm just going to drown myself. I will jump off this ship.
Because otherwise I will have pissed off the ruler of the city, the most powerful man probably in the world at this point.
The Dragon Reborn and, Lan, who will hunt you. like an afraid animal.
And I think I had some confusion when I was like, wait, who sent him? Was it Lan or Rand? And it's both. They're both like, you go protect my girl, right? Like, Rand wants to protect Elaine, and Lan wants to protect Nynaeve. And they're both sending out Julian for some reason, I guess.
And Moraine sends Tom. We see that conversation.
Yeah, that was in 2 chapters ago when she manipulates him by being like, yeah, well, I know about Owen and Elaine and all the shit that goes on in your background, so do what I say, or there's not really an or there. It's just pretty much do what I say.
Do what I say, and I will give you the names of the women who did that to your nephew. It was the way she sweetens the pot.
So he's still there on behalf of Owen.
More or less. And he wants to go. And during that conversation, Moraine even says, like, listen, I mean, you get to be with Elaine, too, and I'm sure you have you would like to see her, that she's safe. I know how close you were.
Right. And that affects him, even though he doesn't want to admit to it.
Which is, and even Elaine doesn't know that.
No, and actually we see this here on the next page when she tugs his mustache.
And you, Master Marilyn, Nynaeve said, did the shepherd send a gleeman after us too? Or the other man, to keep us amused with your juggling and fire-eating, perhaps? Tom had been scrutinizing Sandar closely, but he shifted his attention smoothly and made an elegant bow, only spoiling it with a too elaborate flourish of that patch-covered cloak. Not the shepherd, Mistress Elmira, a lady of our mutual acquaintance asked me to accompany you. The lady who found you, and the shepherd in Emmons Field. Why? Nynaeve said suspiciously. I, too, have useful skills, Tom told her with a glance at the thief-catcher. Other than juggling, that is. And I've been to Chanchico several times. I know the city well. I can tell you where to find a good inn, and what districts are dangerous in the daylight as well as after dark, and who to be bribed so the Civil Watch does not take too close an interest in your doings. They are keen on watching outlanders. I can help you with a good many things.
We saw exactly how Moraine, quote-unquote, asked.
Veiled threats. Tom also exchanges his threats back as well.
Yeah.
Moraine's like, I know who you are. And Tom's like, I know who you are. Let's just say.
But she uses her knowledge to get him to do exactly what she wants.
Yeah, totally. That familiarity tickled at Elaine's mind again. Before she realized what she was doing, she reached up, tugged at one of his long white mustaches. He gave a start, and she clapped both hands over her mouth, flushing crimson. Forgive me. I seem to remember doing that before. I'm sorry. I would remember, he said very stiffly.
Because he does remember.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I do remember. Instead of saying I would remember. He has
instead
that
implies
to correct himself.
Yeah, I would remember if that happened. But he doesn't actually say it that way. He just says, I would remember. Which is kind of an incomplete thought, which I like it. I do too. It leaves Elaine to assume what he meant.
And she doesn't consciously remember his existence yet. Not till she gets drunk.
Yeah.
And then we have the whole incestuous relationship between Tom and Elaine, where she's flirting with him because she thinks he might be her dad. It's this really odd.
Wait, what? She thinks that?
Dynamic. She thinks it's possible. It's more to do with, like, she knows it's someone her mother flirted with, and so she, like, wants to prove that she's better than her mother and can also flirt with him. She's also practicing for Rand. Because she's lonely.
Kelsey says, super weird Santa Dad syndrome. I feel like it's not like too out there or unbelievable, though. As weird as it is, I feel like it just makes sense to me that this could happen. Like the kind of weird development of this relationship, like he's kind of her dad, but not really. And there's the father figure-y thing going on, and he's like this experienced man who's been out in the world. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like too far-fetched to me.
No. And they're not actually related. They're just he's not that old. I mean, he's old, but
Yeah.
And so Nynaeve is like, you can come as long as you do exactly what I tell you to do, as long as you do what you're told. And that actually has effects for quite a while, because basically she forces them to basically swear fealty to her in order to come on the ship. And that gives her total control over their activities, which she throws in their face a few times, because they promise to do what she says on this trip in order to come along. And that leads them down a few paths that they probably shouldn't be on.
I mean, Tom says a Gleeman is a free soul, Nynaeve, but I can promise I will not endanger you. Far from it. As you were told, Nynaeve said pointedly, your word on it, or you will watch this ship sail from the dock.
Very well, my word on it, Mistress Almira.
Oh, yeah,
So
he does eventually agree.
He gives his word
Yeah.
on doing as he is told, and that makes a big difference for his behavior in Tenchiko. And it's why and Matt doesn't swear the same thing. So he there's definitely a point where Matt, I feel like, gets to stand up to them in a way that those two guys cannot, simply because of this oath.
Right.
Matt never swore to do what they said.
He would never.
No, he would never. he would figure out some other way to get on the ship. He'd be like, hell no, and then he'd smuggle himself on there somehow.
I don't have too much for the next page, other than Elaine says, perhaps you're right, do you think they know why we were going to Chanchiko? And Nynaeve says, no, or they'd not be so sanguine, I think.
She doesn't know. They don't know they're dark friends in there. They just know they're going to a dangerous city with a lot that's sort of in chaos right now. So it's like, yeah, they're going to the city full of bandits. We don't really know why, and no one's told them. It's because there's a bunch of Black Ajah there ready to kill them.
Oh, also on that page, Elaine says, I think we can trust him. I don't know why, but I do, Tom Marilyn, in reference to Tom Marilyn.
He's her father, basically, an emotional father at some point.
Yes. A father figure, let's say.
Sure.
To her.
I love the way that Nynaeve refers to his mustache. That thing infesting the Gleeman's face.
I guess, do Two Rivers men... Yeah, all the Two Rivers men shave.
They're pretty... Yeah, I think they're all clean-shaven.
I mean, Perrin eventually grows a beard, but that's...
And then once they go back, there's a bunch of cultures that come in, like mustaches, and there's a whole bunch of people that come over the mountains, and they bring their own culture and their own facial hair with them, that a bunch of the Two Rivers lads adopt. There's some mustaches and some weird facial hair stuff. And then, of course, a bunch of them do the Perrin beard. Or as I like to think of it, the Riker beard.
The leader beard.
Yeah. Well, he's like, it's number one.
Yeah. And also in the show, when Riker's coming into his own, that's when he grows the beard.
Totally. Yeah. It's all about maturing. But also, Rand is Picard in this situation, and Perrin is Riker. Matt is, of course, Data.
What?
Just they're both really good with dice.
Fair.
I would not want to gamble with either one of them. Let's put it that way.
Geez, yeah, I don't have too terribly much for a little bit here. We see a Terran pilot get on the ship, and he's hustled to the side, where there's this law where a Terran pilot has to guide you down the river and out to the ocean, but the sea folk won't let him do anything. So he's to stand alone in a corner essentially, while the sea folk do everything themselves.
And if you've ever been in a harbor, most harbors do need pilots, because a lot of times the harbors have sandbars and stuff that shifts and can change. And so if you're not familiar with the harbor, you actually do need some guidance, someone who's up on the existing pathways and stuff like that, especially in something like the Fingers of the Dragon, which is a bunch of sandbars, and I'm sure they're constantly shifting.
Yeah. I'll read this little part because it kind of demonstrates what's going on here. And, I mean, obviously what is going on here is that I'm sure the Terran pilot is great and really knows his way through the Fingers of the Dragon. But the sea folk have a channeler that can feel the water and know where to go and where not to go. She's an expert at this, and she can see with more than her eyes.
That's a good question. Is she channeling to guide them, or is it just that the sea folk are so good at navigating they don't need a pilot?
I think that's what it is, because they're also speeding. Like, they're moving quickly, and it seems... I'll read this part. The Terran pilot began to pace anxiously once they were in the delta, with the sun overhead, turning up his nose at an offered bowl of thick, spicy fish stew and bread. Elaine ate hers hungrily, wiping the pottery bowl with the last scrap of bread, though she shared his unease. Passages broad and narrow ran in every direction. Some ended abruptly, in plain sight, against a wall of reeds. There was no way to tell which one of the others might not vanish just as suddenly around the next bend. Coeen did not slow Wave Dancer, regardless, or hesitate at choosing a way. Obviously, she knew the channels to take, or the Windfinder did, but the pilot still muttered to himself, as if he expected to run aground at any moment. It was late afternoon when the river mouth suddenly appeared ahead, and the endless stretch of the sea of storms beyond. The sea folk did something with the sails, and the ship shuddered softly to a dead halt. It was only then that Elaine noticed a large rowboat skittering like a many-legged water-bug, out from an island where a few forlorn stone buildings stood around the base of a tall, narrow tower, where men stood small at the top beneath the banner of Tyr, 3 white crescents on a field of red gold. The pilot took the purse Coeen proffered without a word and scrambled down a rope ladder to the boat. As soon as he was aboard, the sails were swung about again, and Wave Dancer breasted the first rollers of open sea, rising slightly, slicing through. When I read that, I thought that said to me that they're either so experienced at coming in and out of the port of Tyr that they can do this better than the pilots that do it all the time, or somehow the Windfinder knows what to do, or can see with more than her eyes.
I'd never considered that the Windfinder was doing something, but I'll give you that. I always thought it was just that showing the sea folk were badass.
Yeah.
And, like, really, really good with the ship. Or it could just be, like, delving. You know, like, they're able to delve the water.
Yeah.
But I just think they know the Aes Sedai are on the ship. I don't think she's risking channeling inside of land. Sort of like the same thing with the shirts. I'm guessing that the Windfinders don't channel inside of land unless they have their shirts off, right? Like, that's the rule. Like, shirts off, you can channel. Shirts on, no channeling.
Yeah, maybe. They might just know. Or they are that good.
I wonder if there's a Windfinder who has a block where she can't channel unless her shirt's off.
Sea folk scampered through the rigging, setting more sails, as the ship sped south and west, away from the land. When the last thin strip of land dropped below the horizon, the sea folk women doffed their blouses, all of them, even the sailmistress and Windfinder. Elaine did not know where to look. And then, of course, like a couple sentences later, she's like looking at Julian, who's like looking up and then at his feet, and then up and at his feet, and then he just rushes away, like underneath the deck, because he's like, I don't know what to look at. Am I allowed to look? Am I not allowed to look? I gotta get out of here.
It's so hard when you're like trying to be polite, but all you want to do is look, you know, like. And then you have to debate, like, what kind of person am I? Am I the kind of person who would just stare and just be like, yeah, those are boobs, I'm looking at them? You know, or are you the kind of person who's, like, going to try and be respectful? Or do you just try and, like, play it off as, like, oh, yeah, you know, people take their shirts off around me all the time. It's totally fine. No problem. And I feel like that's difficult, especially for some of the prudish cultures. Like, Tyr in particular prudish culture.
Yeah. Amongst the Aiel, this wouldn't be weird at all.
No, not at all. Unless you tried to kiss somebody with no shirt on, then it would be real awkward. Or hold their hand. Or, you know, smile at them. We get a little bit from Elaine, who's just excited to be like out exploring the world, even though she's the daughter heir.
Yeah.
So we hear a little bit about the taxes that keeps the town small so that no one can compete with Tyr.
Yeah, along the river down toward the ocean. I'm kind of looking at the conversation between Elaine and Tom and wondering what if there's anything I really want to touch on here. Elaine has the clear thought that Elaine found herself studying him as much as she had the dolphins. What kind of man was this? Twice now he might have laughed at her. He had been amused just then, as much as she hated to admit it, but instead he talked to her as seriously as father to daughter.
'Cause that's how he thinks of her?
Yeah.
I mean, even if she's not his biological daughter, I certainly think that he thinks of her that way.
And we see here as well, Elaine says, Tom, why did you come with us? Was it just because Marina asked you to? And Tom laughs. She realized he was laughing at himself, it says. As to that, who can say? This is Tom avoiding the question. I said asking favors are not easily resisted. Perhaps it was the prospect of your pleasant company for the voyage. Or perhaps I decided Rand is old enough to look after himself for a while.
Or perhaps Moraine did a fantastic job manipulating me into doing exactly what she wanted.
Elaine has the thought, how funny that this aging Gleeman is joking that he can look after the Dragon Reborn, except he did and was.
Of course he did.
Until this morning.
The Supergirls have a chronic habit of underestimating the men in their life. Matt is a fantastic example of that, but Tom as well. They see him as this old Gleeman when he's this, manipulative court bard who can, overthrow kings.
Yeah, master of the game of houses.
Oh, yeah. And Perrin, it's just a weave. What? How did you even get into the world of dreams, much less, become so powerful? She's like, I did great training.
And then Perrin's like, Egwene, you should get out of here. It's dangerous. You don't know what you're doing.
She's like, bitch, I'm the Amerlin seat. He's like, I'm a wolf brother. You may have been trained in the world of dreams. I was born into the world of dreams.
Yeah. This is my house.
And then I feel like we get the whole myths fade to legend speech from Tom, which is that, and he does a little bit with some of the stories about Arthur Hawkwing are a little bit bullshit, but mostly they're true, right? Well, think about in 100 years or 10,000 years. Maybe I'll be the hero. Maybe there'll be some Merlin who's the hero of a story, perhaps throwing fireballs. I don't know,
Yeah, perhaps instead of breathing fire, I'll be throwing it.
And I think that's very much a reference to the King Arthur stories where Merlin is the mage, right? Not Tom Merlin, but...
Merlin. Not Tom Marilyn, but Merlin. Yeah, he mentions Mosk and Merc and Elsbeth and Amla, which, everybody has theories on.
And he just starts pointing out some absurdities in stories, like one man fighting 100 duels in a day. And, it would take you, 50 hours to fight 100 duels. That doesn't work in one day.
Yeah. He's like, of course Arthur Hawkwing didn't fight the 100 best fighters of the army and then thus defeated them, while two great armies looked on, and he did this all in the 16 hours of sunlight that he had, right? 100 fights. Come on.
It's bullshit. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And that's just a minor story relatively recently. In 10,000 years, there's going to be no memory of you, me. They'll be lucky if they even get Rand's name right.
Oh, right. And then here's right after that, he says, go back further, back to the oldest tales I know, from the age before the Age of Legends. Did Mosk and Merc really fight with spears of fire? And were they even giants? Was Elsbeth really queen of the whole world? And was Anla really her sister? Was Anla truly the wise counselor, or was it someone else? As well ask what sort of animal ivory comes from, or what kind of plant grows silk. Unless that comes from an animal too.
Nope, insect.
That's solid guesses.
Do we want to go? So Mosk and Merc are obviously Moscow and America.
Yeah, fighting with spears of fire, like
Or nukes, basically.
or it could be the space race.
That's true. I mean, rockets. Whether we're going to space or bombing each other, we're still fighting with lances of fire.
And then Elsbeth and Amla.
So
her
Elsbeth is Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth of England,
and Amla, Australia.
No,
the sister of England. I don't know. That's just where I was trying to make sense of it.
Anla, the wise counselor, is... Oh, it's supposed to be Ann Landers, the wise counselor, who does the help pages, the help columns.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
So funny.
It's a reference to Ann Landers.
The wise counselor.
The wise counselor. Totally.
Okay, well, whatever. I like those stories.
And, of course, what kind of animal does ivory come from? We know it comes from elephants.
Or, any animal with teeth.
Well, yes, but...
Quoting you, Felron.
Yes, I'm assuming it's the red shredded from Shan Chan that are producing ivory.
I would think so. If they're big enough to be carvable, if we've got elephants and I guess like walruses or sea lions, shows what I know. I don't know. One of those has tusks.
Saber-toothed tiger. And of course, what kind of plant grows silk? Worms.
The worm
All you
plant.
have to do is arm them with some rocket launchers and have them fight against each other, preferably in teams.
Elaine says, why don't you ask the sea folk about ivory and silk? They're, because they would probably know a lot more about it. And Tom says, nope, they don't. Nobody does. Even the sea folk are only allowed to go into the, one port where they can do trading and then leave immediately. They're not allowed to go on shore or anything like that.
And this is our second reference to Shara in 2 chapters, I think. Because, the sea folk are the interface that the people of the Westlands have with the Sharans, right? It either comes across the Aiel Waste with the Aiel, or it's traded by the ships that sail the seas to the Shara land and sail around the Aiel Waste. So those are the 2 places that silk come from. They were bound east until we convinced the sail mistress to take us to Tanshiko. To Shara, the cargo master said, east of Mayen. That must mean beyond the waste. He stared at her for a moment. Shara, you say? I have never heard any such name before. Is Shara a city or a nation or both? I could have sworn that Shara was in Jane Farstrider's book. How would Tom not have heard of Shara if it's actually in...
I thought that was weird too, but I also thought he could be lying.
Yeah, I think that's a plot hole. I think it's very odd that Tom is not familiar with Shara. At least the name of the country.
Right.
Because it's totally in the most popular book in the nation. Anyway, perhaps that's just something that gets overlooked, or perhaps Tom just never read The Travels of Jane Farstrider. Or perhaps I'm wrong about him having the details of...
Maybe it just says the lands beyond the Aiel Waste in the book.
Right. Calls it something else.
Elaine dismisses herself from the conversation.
Right there, the urge to pull one of his mustaches again was almost overwhelming, but she schooled her hands to stillness. She was not a child after all. A child. She opened her mouth, and suddenly everything went out of her head. She's about to realize that Tom is her childhood parental figure.
Yes. But she can't quite put it together. She doesn't know what to say, I think.
I think what happens is she senses channeling on the ship. She senses the Windfinder channeling, and that idea that was starting to coalesce in her head that she hadn't quite wrapped her mind around totally goes out of her head because she's like, oh my God, that's channeling. What the hell was that? It's like hearing a big bang right when you're in the middle of a test. Like, you're just going to lose your train of thought, and she totally loses the fact.
Yeah.
And I think if at that moment the Windfinder hadn't started channeling, she totally would have figured out Tom right there and then.
She excuses herself, and she started toward the stern quickly, which is where the Windfinder is, not waiting for a reply. And when she gets there, 2 men stood at the wheel of the stern deck. The muscle of both needed to hold the vessel on course. The sailmistress was not on deck, but the Windfinder was, standing at the rail beyond the wheelman, bare to the waist like men, studying the sky where billowing clouds rolled more fiercely than the ocean, For once, it was not Joran's state of dress, or undress, that bothered Elaine. The glow of a woman embracing Saidar surrounded her, clearly visible, despite the lurid light. That was what she had felt, what had drawn her. A woman, channeling. Elaine stopped short of the stern deck to study what she was doing. The flows of air and water the windfinder handled were cable-thick, yet her weaving was intricate, almost delicate, and it reached as far as the eye could see across the waters, a web drawn across the sky. The wind rose higher, higher. The wheelman strained, and Wave Dancer flew across the sea. The weaving stopped, and the glow of Saidar vanished, and Joran slumped at the rail, leaning on her hands.
And that's the kind of channeling that's needed in order to control the bowl of the winds. They've got 2 strong men at the tiller in order to control the ship when she's like just massively powering the wind, just pushing the sails for everything it's got.
In the middle, as I worked, and this is Joran speaking, the windfinder. In the middle, as I worked, I thought that you were watching me. I could not stop then. There might have been a storm even Wave Dancer could not survive. The Sea of Storms is well named. It will throw up bad winds enough without my help. I meant not to do this at all, but Coeen said we must go quickly, for you, and for the Coromor. She raised her eyes to peer at the sky. This wind will hold until morning, if it pleases the light. This is why the sea folk do not carry Aes Sedai, Elaine said, taking a place beside her at the rail, so the tower won't learn windfinders can channel. This is why it was your decision to let us aboard, not your sister's, Joran. The tower will not try to stop you. There's no law in the tower to stop any woman channeling, even if she is not Aes Sedai. Your White Tower will interfere. It will try to reach onto our ships, where we are free of the land and landsmen. It will try to tie us to itself, binding us away from the sea. She sighed heavily. The wave that has passed cannot be called back.
I like the way Jordan gives every little culture its own expressions. The wave that has passed cannot be called back. You know?
Yeah. Cat's out of the bag.
Yeah. Whatever that expression is, it's different in every culture, but it's relevant to the cultures.
Mm-hmm. Elaine says, listen, I can't promise to keep your secret, but I'm not just going to go around telling everyone. She swears it.
I feel like the rest is a bit of a summary. She talks about the fight.
Oh, you know, I'll start right here. Right after Elaine swears that she'll do her best not to give away the secret, she says, there was a Damani on that Shan-Shan ship, wasn't there? The Windfinder gave her a quizzical look. One of the captive women who can channel, Elaine clarifies. You see deeply, for one so young. That is why I first thought you might not be Aes Sedai, because you are so young. I have daughters older than you, I think. I do not know if she was a captive. That makes me wish we could have saved her. Wave Dancer outran the Shan-Shan vessel easily at first. We heard of the Shan-Shan and their vessels with rib sails, that they demanded strange oaths and punished those who would not give them. But then the Damane broke 2 of his masts, and they boarded him with swords. I managed to start fires on the Shan-Shan vessel. Weaving fire is difficult for me beyond lighting a lamp, but it pleases the light to make it enough. And Torum led the crew to fight the Shan-Shan back to their own decks. We cut loose the boarding hooks, and their ship drifted away, burning. They were too occupied with trying to save him to bother us as we limped away. I regretted seeing him burn and sink then. He was a fine ship, I think, for heavy seas. Now I regret it, because we might have saved the woman, the Damane. Even if she damaged him, perhaps she would not have, free. The light illumine her soul, and the waters take her peacefully. Telling the story had saddened her. She needed to be distracted. Joran, why do the Atha Mir call the ships he? Everyone else I've met calls them she. I don't suppose it makes any difference. But why? The men will give you a different answer, the Windfinder said, smiling, speaking of strength and grandness and the like as men will. But this is the truth. A ship is alive, and he is like a man, with a true man's heart. She rubbed the rail fondly, as if stroking something alive, something that could feel her caress. Treat him well, and care for him properly, and he will fight for you against the worst sea. He will fight to keep you alive even after the sea has long since given him his own death stroke. Neglect him, though. Ignore the small warnings he gives of danger, and he will drown you in a flat sea beneath a cloudless sky.
Is she describing a ship or Rand?
I don't think Rand would drown you in a flat sea beneath a cloudless sky for ignoring him.
I don't know. You don't treat him well. He goes insane.
He goes insane anyway.
Well, they don't treat him well, do they? They
No,
kind of
nobody
ignore
really
him
does.
a little bit. Yeah.
She glanced over her shoulder toward the bow. Tom was gone. She was sure she had found the key to his puzzle just before she had felt the Windfinder channeling. Something to do with his smile. It was gone, whatever it was. Well, she meant to find it again before they reached Tanchico. If she had to sit on him, but he would still be there in the morning. Joran, how long before we reach Tanchico? I have been told Rakers are the fastest ship in the world. But how fast? To Tanchico? To serve the Coromor, we will not stop at any port between. Perhaps 10 days, if I can weave the winds well enough, if it pleases the light that I find the proper currents. Perhaps as few as 7 or 8, with the grace of the light. 10 days? Elaine gasped. It cannot be possible. She had seen maps, after all. The other woman's smile was half pride, half indulgence. As you yourself said, the fastest ships in the world. The next quickest take half again as long over any stretch, and most more than twice as long. Coasting craft that hug the shore and anchor in the shallows each night, she sniffed contemptuously, require 10 times as much. Joran, would you teach me to do what you were just doing? The Windfinder stared, her dark eyes wide and shining in the fading light. Teach you? But you are Aes Sedai. Joran, I have never woven a flow half as thick as those you were handling, and the scope of it, I am astounded, Joran. The Windfinder stared a moment more, no longer in amazement, but as if trying to fix Elaine's face in her mind. Finally, she kissed the fingers of her right hand and pressed them to Elaine's lips. If it pleases the light, we shall both learn.
And that is the beginning of the mutual respect that Aes Sedai have for the other cultures. I mean, it takes a while, and it's certainly not all of them, but at least something. It's the beginning of the uniting of all women who can channel across the entire world.
Yeah, Egwene's tower. Or
Exactly.
Egwene starts it, but I imagine...
Yeah, it's Elaine's tower. She reunites the tower. She brings in all the kin. She brings in all the new novices. She brings in the sea folk. She creates the alliance. I mean, it's a huge, huge win for her in terms of, like, bringing what was a dying tower back into existence. So, all right, here's a question. Could a wave dancer ever make a portal big enough to sail a ship through?
Windfinder.
Damn it.
Sorry, I don't want to be a
No,
dick,
yeah,
but I feel like
yeah,
I should
yeah.
let
No,
you.
please,
Wave
yeah.
Dancer is the ship that they're on. No. Like, only Andral could do that alone.
I think
It's
if you had a
huge.
circle, you could.
Oh, well, yeah. But I mean, one person, no. But a big circle, I think you could, like Rauco saying 13, but, maybe even less. Like the power of how many women combined. If one very strong woman can make a gateway big enough for, like, 2 men abreast on horses to go through, then maybe 5 or 7, I don't know, in a
we see
circle
the
could put a boat through it.
Full circle in the last battle creates just that massive gateway that the Sharans come through. That's a full circle with Esa and Riel, and that's a massive, massive gateway.
Of 72 channelers, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Rauco, there's a lot of problems with, I think it's addressed in the series later, but there would be a lot of problems with making gateways either on a boat or to put a boat through, because it's because of the space that you're making a gateway in, you have to be, like, familiar with or whatever, and then, yeah, so it would be very difficult.
But we see Rand make a gateway to the ship, and he just leaves the gateway like a foot above the deck so that the movement of the ship doesn't, like, cause the gateway to cut the ship up.
That's true. Does he have to go be on the ship first?
No, because he's going to the ship.
All right. Probably something we should bring up before we begin is we're doing our new round of merch.
Yes, we are.
So we'll be sending out the first round of Mistborn stuff approximately 6 months after we started. That's not so bad. It's about what we did with What Spoilers. And you said
9-ish months.
Oh, really? Ugh.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Close enough. You said you want to do Watt stuff too, right?
Yeah, I went ahead and put together a list of everybody who needed Watt swag while I was doing the Mistborn swag list. And it looks like it's about 42 people who are going to get Watt stuff.
What is it, like 50 Mistborn people? Well, that reminds me, I'm going to put my new Mistborn sticker on my laptop.
And yeah, Mistborn folks, instead of buttons, we're going with magnets. The buttons were kind of a nightmare to ship because the metal clasp on the back kept just destroying the envelope they were in.
And then everything would fall out and people would just get
and everything would fall out. They wouldn't get anything. They'd just get the letter, but there wouldn't be any merch in there. They would have gotten lost along the way. So the Mistborn stuff is going to be a square 3x3-inch magnet and a round 3-inch diameter sticker. But yeah, so it looks like, Mistborn, we've got 37 patrons, and probably half of those are below the $2 or at two or less. So I think we only have like maybe 20 people to send Mistborn merch to.
Cool.
Unless you want to go out there and donate to the Mistborn Spoilers podcast to get some stickers and magnets.
Hey. Can always use the help. But there's at least one new project in the works, which is pretty cool. Hopefully that pans out. Which me and Seth are just helping with, not hosting.
It's enough here to talk about. I've talked about Broken Earth Spoilers podcast repeatedly. Just getting you and me to sit down another day and talk about ourselves again for the 5th day of the week, I felt like was a little much. And so what we ended up doing is getting Aradia and Travis, who have both been guests on this show, to agree to host that. And I'll be editing it and putting it out as part of Fox and Raven Media.
In theory.
In theory, right?
Still in the works.
No, there's no theory to it. We haven't recorded anything yet, but they've committed. I've committed. I have emailed them our old microphones. That was part of getting these new microphones, is they got the old ones. And so hopefully their sound quality will be as good as ours was on What Spoiler.
Regular mail. You said email. I'm just, I don't know.
Yeah, I got nothing. I should have said mail. Yeah. And so, I'm excited to edit that, and we're going to put that out as part of Fox and Raven Media. I'm sure there will be some guest appearances by yours truly and Patrick as well.
Pretty likely.
Yeah, we get to be the annoying hosts the annoying guests who correct the hosts on that one. So I'm pretty excited about that.
My ebook says I am 36% of the way of the 3rd book. So, coming soon. Which is
almost there.
I gotta say, though, they're so good, and N.K. Jemisin is such a fucking good writer that I have, barely been able to put the book down. It was like sitting at the bar with Julia the other day, and she got up to go to the bathroom, and I immediately opened my Kindle. She came back, and she was just gave me that look. No reading while we're socializing, young man.
That Kindle's good for you, man. I think that Kindle's really good for you.
No, it's really good, and I'm really digging it also because, I've tried reading on my phone and other stuff like that. But I really like the Kindle because it's not connected to anything else other than my Amazon account. So there's no notifications. There's no nothing. I can't be I wonder what's happening on Reddit right now and do that, So it's just a book.
Yeah.
That's all it does. And that works great. And yeah, I've been carrying it around with me everywhere I go. And I'm looking forward to it. I made a goal for myself to read at least 52 books this year, or this coming year. Damn it. I just realized that I just read 3 books, and it's not next year yet. So I guess, I'll just have to read more. Whatever.
Count them.
It's 10 days to next year.
Yeah. Add in 2
half.
books. Try and get to 55 or something like that,
I should be able to. I should be able to do it. I mean, considering that like in the last week and a half, I read almost all of Broken Earth. I'll probably finish it tomorrow. I should be able to read because that's like 1,500 pages, I think, approximately. The whole series, the whole trilogy.
It depends a lot on I mean, are you reading Brandon Sanderson Stormlight Archive books, or are you reading,
Well, some I'm sure, like there's some just like, English and American lit stuff that I've been meaning to read that are like 150-page books, which is like, of course, nothing to us, but a book's a book. But then I'm sure like I've been meaning to reread Stormlight because I still haven't read the third book. So like I can do that.
You still haven't done that.
I know. It's because Kelsey's yelling at me. It's because when the third book was coming out, I was like, oh man, it's been so long. I feel like I have to read the first two in order to understand what the hell's happening in the third one because it's been years, So,
Yeah,
so
and that was in the middle of Watt spoilers too.
Yeah.
And we were all of our busy time. We've been busy. We've been busy with this whole podcasting thing.
And I was hoping, and one of the reasons I sprung to buy the brand new Kindle is because I wanted to encourage myself to read more other than Watt and Mistborn.
Right.
Which of course I'm reading all the time, but I should be reading other stuff too. And last year I really probably only read like a dozen books other than the what we're working on.
Yeah, and that's just not very many for us.
Yeah, that's really slow. Only one a month. But like I said, I'm just working on the podcast stuff and doing rereads of things. Like I read Mistborn twice last year. I read the series twice.
Basically, every time we start a new Wheel of Time book, I go through the entire Wheel of Time series. So I've done that 4 times since we started the podcast in the last year and a half. And then on top of that, I've done all of Mistborn Era 2, all of Stormlight Archive. And then just on top of that, I picked up a bunch of other authors that I've listened to probably a dozen audiobooks that I've gotten through Audible, including Broken Earth I only discovered within the last year. And then just a bunch of other junky fantasy novels that I've read that I either don't remember or don't care to.
Right.
It's like, yeah, okay, that wasn't very good.
It just doesn't stand out.
I'm done. And we've talked about a few of those books, especially the hyper-violent ones. Where I've read them and people like them, I'm just not really into it.
Oh yeah, there was what's the one that always stood out to me, which was just brutal. Was it like Prince of something? Prince of Thorns?
Yeah, we talked about it a few times, and we always debate over exactly what the title is.
Every time.
Neither one of us cares enough, yeah.
I mean, I read the whole thing. I just don't remember.
Sure, but I have zero desire to go back and think about it for another minute. Like, I read it, it happened, it was kind of brutal. I didn't really enjoy the
Prince of Thorns, The Broken Empire.
Yeah.
Mark Lawrence, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the books that comes up whenever people are like, I've read The Wheel of Time, what else should I read? And like that's one of the things that comes up, and I'm like,
yeah, it's great murder porn. I just want something a little higher minded than that. Action is great. The brutality, I get it. It sucks you in because it's so wild and everything, but I don't know.
I see it as the post Game of Thrones movement. It's like, and it wasn't after Game of Thrones came out in books. It was after Game of Thrones came out in television. And I see a bunch of people who are writing Game of Thrones style books, and I don't enjoy them. I'm not even sure that I really liked it that much when it was George R.R. Martin doing it. And now that other people are doing it worse, I'm like, no, not really my jam.
And yeah, I feel like kind of upping the ante is what I've seen. I think a lot of just the murder, gore, and rape in that one series was like so over the top. It's kind of a little difficult.
And I feel like that's a theme in a certain percentage of modern fantasy. And I get about halfway into a book and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
Murder porn without decent characters or a story.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?